day, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Leaders Podcast. My name's Mike LaCorte. I'm your host. And Leaders Podcast gives me the opportunity to speak to some of the most influential leaders in the investigation, intelligence, and risk management space. Today, I'm joined by a good friend and colleague, Björn Wahlström from Hong Kong. Björn's been in the industry a long time. I'll let him introduce himself to you now. But Björn, welcome. I'm looking forward to speaking to you today.
Hi, Mike. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm uh, I'm the CEO of Sphere State Group in my day-to-day. Now, we're going to talk a lot about my experience in the industry and what I'm doing now. But in a nutshell, I was born in Sweden, but I've been in China and Hong Kong for about 25 years now. Came to China 2001, then moved to Hong Kong 2014. Within that space, I've touched on a lot of different industries, often with a focus on security, uh, brand protection, and the last few years now, crisis management and asset tracing. It's been a long journey, and I'm excited to start unpacking a bit what's happened in the industry since I got started.
Fantastic. So 2001, you moved to China. What was the step there, and why did you do that?
Uh, it's a it's a story I often tell over a beer in the evenings.
Okay.
But in essence, I was a martial artist or an aspiring martial artist as a young man. That's what pulled me to China. Now, China 2001 was still a pretty gray and communist
Mm,
place. The community and environment hadn't really taken off. You had your multinationals were kind of there on the scene, but it wasn't yet. It didn't have any resemblance of the China you'd see now when you visit. All right. Just to give you one
yeah.
example, it was very limited to at what hotels foreigners were even allowed to stay at, and it was difficult to find those hotels outside any of the major cities. All right. Um, my interest there was much more mystical and youthful than what I actually ended up doing. All right, although I have kept up my martial art, maybe not on the level that I aspired to, but I've kept it up. But that's the origins.
Oh, right. Okay. That's interesting. I'd like to, we can talk about that over a beer a bit more when I see you next. But martial arts, China, and then you moved into the intelligence and investigation world.
Mhm.
How was that transition?
Well, China was developing very fast in the 2000s. It was a really wild place. Some people say, and I might agree, that it resembles a little bit what the journey Dubai's done the last 10 years. China was doing in the
Mm,
2000s to around 2010, right? I got started in supply chain management, now with a focus on problem solving in supply chain. And I had the brand
hmm
protection bit there very early on. That was one of the early security concerns that a lot of companies had in China. Um, so the journey for me went from understanding how China operates, behind the scenes, how people think, and how people think when they might want to trick you or take advantage of you, and then try and counter that or try and unwind an event that's already taken place. All right, that made me interesting to the investigations industry, and I was headhunted to a firm in South China to do full-time brand protection and enforcement in 2012. So for a few years there, I got my start as a full-time security specialist. I got started
hmm
doing investigations and raid actions in brand protection. So figuring out where we had a portfolio of around 10 big US brands. We
mm.
and the job was simple: figure out where counterfeits are coming from, who's producing them, who the main offenders are, and work with local police to raid them, shut them down, destroy the goods. Yeah.
Sure. That was, I remember that market was, yeah, very, very interesting. So you were working for obviously multinational brands or brands that are based outside of China and enforcing those, doing the undercover work and managing the raids. Are you speak Chinese, Cantonese, or any local language? We have a good understanding.
I speak Chinese very well. Yeah, I took the long route there.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I studied in studied in Wuhan in the early days. Um, Before
Oh,
Wuhan
right.
was known for what it's now known for, but it's also a very nice place, especially if you want to immerse yourself, study Chinese. So yeah, and I've worked in all Chinese teams for a lot of years after that. My team in Shanghai is still, I mean, the senior management that do speak a good level of English, but the team there is all Chinese speaking. Yeah, and it's yeah.
I love talking about this point, and actually, because we've gone straight into investigations and raids and local law enforcement in China, and your experience being, say, of Western origin, how have you found the liaising and interacting with the public sector, with your law
Mm.
authorities, being from private sector background? How is private public, or how are private investigators or investigators as a whole viewed upon
Mm.
within the sort of local law enforcement community?
It's a very good question. It's a very interesting relationship. You see, to Chinese law enforcement, corporate sector should really be treated as a commercial sector that deals with its own issues. All right.
Mm.
Um, they are reluctant to get involved, and this applies to law enforcement as well as the enforcement agencies, the AIC that oversees commercial disputes, including the brand protection IP portfolio.
Hmm.
Right. Ideal to them is that companies sort out issues between them. Um, but they also rely on companies to provide information to them in sectors where they don't have the resources. Now, that used to be brand
Hmm.
protection. So whenever you'd read about some major raid, you still can. It still comes up in the papers from Chinese police raids this and that factory and seizes this and that many millions of counterfeit goods. The good odds
Mm.
is that there's a private investigations firm behind that, and there's good chances that shop operates in kind of in this gray area that China likes to create, where you're not you're not you're not really licensed to do what you're doing, but you're also not explicitly prohibited from doing what you're doing. So
Is that for the investigators? Are you talking about investigators or the counterfeiters or both?
for the investigator. I'm still the part of the investigators.
Okay.
Yeah. Uh, so if you operate in the wrong way, you build your case in the wrong way. So if you come to the police with a
Yeah.
file that contains evidence that you've gathered, obviously through, say, surveillance methods in a residential area, or something that they feel it falls too far on the darker shade of the gray area, all right, you can get yourself in trouble. But if you deliver a file to them where the evidence is clean, the methods don't raise any concerns, and then ideally you've actually used methods that are all clearly in the white area of what you're allowed to do in China when it comes to maybe secret recordings and so on. All right, if you do that, they will take your file and they will consider, depending a little bit on what it is you're asking them to do, they might partner with you to take and to enforce, enforce the case you're trying to get them to take action on. All right. Now, they also depend on you on training. And again, the brand protection is a good example of where in the 2000s we'd spend a lot of time going around, not just police, but also administrative officers, customs officials, to walk them through what foreign companies, what global companies expect in brand protection, how IP works, how brands should be viewed, and all the way down to the nitty gritty of how an individual brand is built and how to spot counterfeits to that brand. And nowadays it's moved on. Maybe brand protection is not, it's not it's not a sought after training, but other areas that we operate in are, such as crypto, right? Where Chinese police will
Hmm.
invite you to come, they will invite us to come and walk them through how asset tracing in crypto works. There's a kind of trend there in what areas Chinese police like to work with you at and what they view as valuable information to them and their team.
Interesting. Is there licensing for investigators in China?
No, the straightforward answer is not. There are licenses in the security space. They tend to
Hmm.
relate to physical security and technical security. And there's no license obtainable by foreign companies. All right. Then there are specific licenses within information gathering that you can go and apply for. But um, the truth is that it's one of those areas that are intentionally loosely defined, and where it's up to the
Mm.
foreign operator, like navigating China, to figure out where the lines goes between what you can and cannot do.
I'm going to ask the most straightforward question here now. How does one know what they can and can't do, especially as a foreign national investor? Let's like you, for example, without falling into a position that you think, "Oops, I shouldn't have done that," or "I didn't realize," or How do you navigate
Mm.
such challenges in a country where potentially there's some, repercussions if you get it wrong?
I mean, I think one of the answers is you do have to get it wrong here and there to learn. But ideally, you try and surround yourself with people that can both that you can learn from on where these lines go, um, and you try and learn by erring on the side of caution. Um, yeah.
Mm,
That said, it's not easy, and then here maybe, I mean, Dubai can
yeah.
maybe again serve as an interesting parallel. I mean, Dubai has a developed legal system in many areas. To my knowledge, it doesn't really provide clarity on what an investigator is and isn't allowed to do. It does so in particular areas. Again, maybe in the area of secret recordings and privacy, it does provide a framework. But does it have
Mhm.
a licensing regime for private investigators the way we do in the UK?
No,
No.
no, no. You're right. You're right, and it is a developing market at a rapid rate as well. So with a lot of foreign investment, that becomes when there's a lot of foreign investment in one particular jurisdiction, over time there will become disputes, there will become disagreements, there will become issues, and it's the opportunity where risk professionals, some type of investigation, unpicking what happened and how, those skills are required. And I suppose it's playing catch up with the legal system, catch up with the compliance, and what you can and can't do that helps. Interesting. So for the young, how do young people get into the industry in China then in that type? Is how is the industry made up? Is it like other sectors where predominantly ex-law
Mm,
enforcement or ex-military are in, covering most of the work and coming into the industry towards the end of their careers, or are
mm.
there any entry points for more younger professionals? Talk to me a
Yeah.
little bit about
Well, I
the
think first and
demographic.
foremost, I think it's helpful to expand and think of the region as a whole here. Okay, so it was much more separated in different units when I first arrived 25 years ago, but it's now become much more fluid, and then people move around in the space, and cases and the money cases
Mm,
pertain to move around in a very different way. All right. The journey that I've taken, and my company reflects that. So we, I think 6, 7 years ago, we were a very China focused shop, whereas now, we've grown out from that to become to include Hong Kong, then to include Singapore, and now to include all of Southeast Asia,
mm,
Japan, all the way to Dubai. All right, so a regional shop, if you will. The way professionals get into the space, I think, reflect that. Now, if I take the second part of your question narrowly, the kind of feeder pipes into the profession, into the industry, are similar to an extent to what you'd find in the US or in the UK. So you have, on the one hand, you have military, and ex-law enforcement, but I'd argue that in Asia as a whole, in North Asia as a whole, you'd have a little bit less of that, and you have more of a private sector feeder line. So people from security experience in the banking sector, and compliance
mm,
jobs in big corporates. Those are very common feeder pipes. All right.
mm,
Once you go to Southeast Asia, again, the police, military type background becomes more common again. On and the seniors move around. So you have there's been a general movement of the big security firms from Hong Kong, Shanghai down towards Singapore. And to some extent, the younger crowd has moved with that. And that has created a little bit of a crunch for us in Hong Kong to find the right talents. Oftentimes now, we also look at people with wider research capabilities. So, I mean, we end up interviewing people from the journalist sector, would be one. I like looking at CVs. If you want to talk a little bit about what's alluring when we're hiring, I like looking at people with a general problem-solving skill. Like I like to see people that have experience from working in difficult regions, along ideally with experience working from in strict corporate backgrounds. Like, do you always find those together on one CV? Probably not, but that's the kind of stuff I like. I like to find on a resume.
Yeah, no, good. And just while we're on that resume, what actually makes a good investigator? What skills make a
But
good
some are
investigator?
really boring. And this is something I think a lot of people get wrong when they look at the industry from the outside, right? And it's the systematic analytical approach to gathering and analyzing information. I mean, these are skills that a lot of people learn very well in big corporate environments, in law firm type environments, and to some extent in journalistic environments, right? What's harder to learn is the field investigator experience, and this it's harder to predict there where you're going to find a good investigator. But do you find them a lot of the time with former law enforcement officers? Sure, it happens. But on the other hand, the law enforcement officers have kind of a disadvantage in that they come from a background where everything's accessible to them. They can plug in an ID number and get a full criminal background. They can go bang on the door and get an interview. I mean, sure, there's a protocol to be followed, and you can't just willy-nilly go about doing that with anyone. But in essence, if your investigations takes you to a door, you're going to have a way to knock at it. But as private investigators, we're much more constrained in what we can and cannot do and what information we can and cannot access. So good problem solvers in the investigations industry oftentimes are people that have had to learn how to find information with limited means. And journalists fit that bill very well, as do people from big corporate problem-solving positions, perhaps. Compliance people, not always, but again, it depends. And this feeds into another question that we can discuss a bit if you want, and it's the importance of finding mentors that can bring you these skills and that can teach you these skills. All right, so you can spend years in a compliance position learning nothing but ticking boxes and moving a file from left on your desk to the right side of your desk and approve and calling it approved, right? But you can sit in with the same title and with a very similar set of tasks, but with the right mentor, someone who's willing to bring you an understanding of what the work means, what the exceptions are, what the cases are where you really need to like activate your brain cells and try and make a difference, and that you're able to do so if you can be creative with a file. Now that's something rare, and it's something you can find in every industry, but it's also rare in every industry.
Yeah, no, great point. So, okay, understood. Investigating in China at a grassroots level, okay, where are the pinch points? Where are the difficult parts of that? What would you find the most difficult bit of doing anything or getting anything done there?
I think I'd say source work is very difficult in China. It's a society that's generally very guarded with information. Even within a group of people that know each other, information is kind of compartmentalized. So even within, if anyone who's worked in a big Chinese company, the way I have, knows that it's full of politics, and it's full of kind of guarded little fiefdoms, where you feel that the value, one of the values
Mm,
I have here, is to kind of contain the views I have of certain pieces of information. It makes it very difficult to obtain good source quotes, even on items we'd consider fairly trivial from a corporate point of view in Europe. A good example here is maybe finding and interviewing ex-employees from a firm. Very standard in places like
mm,
Australia or the UK or the US, and it's often very easy to get people to talk. In fact, in some of these jurisdictions, you can just pay them to talk, and you say,
mm,
look, we're doing a bit of a survey here. We'll throw you just a little bit of money if you agree to answer a few questions, right? Um, there's no culture, and there's
mm,
no kind of receptors for those approaches in China, all right? Often the effect of that is often the kind of stories and narratives we have to come up with to get that information becomes much more elaborate. But more than that, the way we have to trust on our network being able to penetrate all the way into the groups or the companies that we want to get information about becomes much more important than it is in places where you can be more straightforward with these questions.
mm. Interesting. Yeah. You do quite a lot in the crypto space, right? Investigating. How difficult is it to trace down stolen, hidden crypto from to international type crypto
Mm,
investigations? How difficult
mm,
really is it? I mean, what's the real truth behind getting behind some
mm,
of these wallets? And talk a little bit about that and your expertise there, because I've listened to you speak a few times, Bjorn, and you're a wealth of
mm.
knowledge in this sector. And it'd be just nice to give us a few minutes in terms of what the perception is, what the truth is, and because we see many people that have been tricked, scammed, deceived with lots of crypto fraud or even just bad investments. How on an honest, straightforward, as a crypto expert, give us your view.
So we've been in the space for about 5 years now. We came into the crypto part of asset tracing
Mm,
because it's where our clients' interest was taking us. So we worked for a lot of pioneers in the industry and a lot of early adopters and high net worth individuals. So now, in tandem with that, we've continued to do traditional tracing. And a lot of the time, what people come to us for now is to do that mixture of a case that has items and points of interest, both off chain and on chain. So there's forensics bits that is going to take you into digital assets. And there's good old fashioned bank wires, perhaps, that went to the wrong person. There's real estate and companies of interest and so on. All right. Now, in a case like that, there are distinct advantages to tracing crypto to compare to tracing traditional fiat. And the advantages are to the investigator are to some extent similar to what a money launderer or a thief would put forward, right? The blockchain is transparent, and it doesn't need you to wait
mm,
for a court to sign an order for you to get insight into where the money moved to. Um, it doesn't need, from a client's point of view, there's no need to hire an attorney to go and petition the court to get documents released from a bank. In fact, it kind of changes. This is something I've talked about quite a lot the last few years. It changes, to the frustration of many law firms. It changes the pecking order between lawyer and investigator, and the client often needs an investigator before they need a lawyer. The reason for that is, until you know what
yeah.
jurisdiction your digital assets have ended up in, you won't know what jurisdiction you need a lawyer in. All right. And this has taken some time for a lot of lawyers to wrap their heads around. But ultimately, what the lawyers now need is a very quick, lightning quick investigation, so they know if the case is interesting to them or not. All right. If I back up a step,
Yeah.
um, it has some disadvantages. So it has the advantage of speed. it has the advantage of affordability in the grand scheme of things, and I do think we're still seeing a pretty dramatic change in the cost structure and the cost of tracing crypto. And it's constantly the general trend there is it's gonna keep getting cheaper than tracing traditional assets. All right. Now, it has a distinct disadvantage in that it doesn't automatically tie assets to a location or to an address. So with a traditional banking system, it might take a while to get those disclosures from a bank where money was fraudulently dispatched to. Right? But it has the advantage that once you get that, the account will be firmly tied in the bank's KYC to an individual or to a company. Now, in crypto, it might happen that you find your money, you do an investigation, you find your money a couple of hops away, but it's just sitting there in an anonymous wallet with no real history and no name tag attached to it. But that's maybe a bit of an outlier scenario, but it's perfectly feasible. And in fact, even from the very founder of the Bitcoin protocol, there are known wallets sitting around where millions of dollars have not moved since inception. They were just the funds were stuck in were put in there, and they're still sitting there. And anyone can go there and observe that part of the blockchain. Now, it's also an interesting industry, and I'll wrap up here, and you can keep asking me questions on the specifics. Okay, it's a very immature and a very new industry. This has disadvantages and advantages. I mean, one of the interesting parts for me as an investigator is we constantly have to be in a technical competition against thieves and people with bad intentions. All right. So they're looking at the same tools that we're looking at. They're using the same languages to code protocols and to try and devise new ways of hiding the path they're laundering money from or funneling money away with. We're using the same tools and the same thinking to try and outsmart them. And it's happening not year on year, but sometimes week on week to try and be the smarter party. All right. The same applies once you get up to the level of on and off ramps of crypto in and out of fiat currencies. And here, as I was saying before, crypto is still a very immature industry. A lot of it comes down to knowing the right people with the right exchange or provider in the digital asset space to be able to actually create the right effect for your client, which is often quick freeze of assets, right? Now, again, if you move back to the traditional banking system, there's really no scenario anymore in 2026 where anyone can call the head of a bank and ask them to put a temporary freeze of an account. That's just not how it goes. Maybe on some level of society, but for all practical purposes for our clients, that doesn't exist. But crypto is so fast moving, and there's so few players in this still very much developing industry that it does work on that personal relationship level. Yeah, so there are a couple of observations maybe and from our perspective.
Well, very interesting. So, do you think can criminals keep completely anonymous on the blockchain?
Anonymous is maybe one thing. Can you operate without leaving a trace is another. It's a scale of how skillful and how artful you are, and at what level of competency your team and your partners are at. All right. If you know, so one way to answer the question is if you know what you're doing and you have a well-funded, well-educated team in a professional environment with state-of-the-art gear, you can do a lot to stay undetected and to keep your identity from leaking. I mean, nowadays, the last 2 years, one of the developments we've seen is the move has been the general trend in on-chain criminality has been towards larger conglomerates, larger criminal groups, and state-level actors. So when I say well-funded teams, it's not about 10 smart guys with fast computers. It's about compounds, the way big corporates have compounds with hundreds of people, with different
Right.
departments,
Yeah.
with educational programs, and very, very well funded.
Mm,
Um, we're thinking state level actors, the way North Korea and Iran operate in the digital asset
mm,
space. So again, very well funded and often with highly educated people at the helm.
mm. So, in summary, in the work in the space you sit at, would you prefer to tackle a conventional type asset investigation, a traditional type asset investigation, or would you feel, in terms of success, would you feel better in tackling a crypto type asset investigation?
Mm.
Completely separate, not combining the two. Which one do you
So I
prefer?
really like it when they intersect and when I get a piece of both worlds. It's really our sweet spot. All right. I'll give you an example of that type of case is the
Mm,
bankruptcies in crypto. And then the bankruptcies in crypto is only going to go one direction. As the space grows and matures, uh, you are going to see more and more of those. Like
mhm,
we've seen a few very spectacular ones a few years back, but you now have a bigger
mm,
churn of just tens of millions of worth of bankruptcies rather than the spectacular tens, and even billions worth of dollars. Right now, what I like is it gives you the
mm,
opportunity to investigate the corporate structure of the company holding the digital assets with the owners, the corporate
mhm,
bank accounts, then the traditional assets that you'd expect to find under owners, and you get the digital assets. And you'd see after a bankruptcy, a lot of the time, we'd be asked to look at movement of assets within a couple of days around surrounding the date of filing a bankruptcy. And you'd see stuff uh,
mhm,
like tens of millions moving out from the digital asset side of the group into unknown wallets, and you keep tracing those wallets. You get to exchanges and you
mm,
get to private accounts under the owners, and you get to real estate, yachts, and everything that you'd expect to find in a more traditional investigation. Now, when you do an investigation like that, you have the privilege of working from both sides. So you can also then go and look at how is this individual living his day-to-day life, and you can go and find the yacht physically, and then you go and figure out how and when was this bought and how was it paid for. So this is an investigation that makes me enthusiastic as a professional, because you get to have two teams with different focus trying to both find facts that gives the totality of events around a key date. Now that's exciting to me.
yeah, it makes complete sense. And also, crypto investigations actually just provided other leads to identifying non-conventional assets. So it's another lead for an investigator. We're literally over time, but I want to ask you one more question before we wrap up. What's your bit of advice that you would give to younger people that are either transitioning or considering a career in your space?
We talked a little bit earlier about mentorship and the importance of finding someone willing to guide you in a way that schools and corporate cultures maybe cannot. I think I'd put this somewhere at the top. All right. Now, alongside with that, there's the boring skills that I mentioned before, and I really can't emphasize this enough. You got to dare be boring where that's what's called for, to learn the systematic skills of the craft,
Mm,
uh, of not missing the one key piece of information in a 100-page document. And that's not sure that it plays a role to have that sixth sense about where the important piece of the puzzle is. But one of the key skills that I think needs developing is the patience to wait for the right leads to come out of the material, and to systematically go, like, build your cases piece by piece, and not be guided by this idea of the inspired investigator that gets these flashes of flashes of intelligence of where the key piece is going to be, and runs off and spends all your budget and all your efforts on that one thing. Now, is there a is there a is there a place in the industry for people who rely fully on their hunch and they tend to get results? Sure. But for a young person, I think these two pieces is what I'd like to emphasize. It's about the systematic, the boring skills, be on time, always follow through methodically the material you actually have access to, build your case piece by piece, and then make sure you're working for someone who is actually worth your time, who's giving you something other than just instructions every morning and a deadline in the evening to deliver that work product. Make sure you're getting something else of the nerve of the industry. Make sure you're getting to sit in on meetings, that you see seniors discuss cases, that you're getting to sit in on client meetings, all right? If you're getting those things, you're well on your way, you're well on your learning curve, all right?
Brilliant, Bjorn. Thank you for those bits of advice. Remember, select a decent mentor, investigate a case piece by piece. You've been listening to another episode of Leaders Podcast.